Hey there, my name is Ben Everingham and I'm the director here at Pumped on Property, and in today's video I'm going to talk about when is the right time to buy an investment property. Now, timing is extremely important, and if this is your first time to my YouTube channel or blog, welcome. Please subscribe. We produce about 3 of these types of videos each week, and I'd love to hear your feedback and also any other videos you'd like me to record, which you can chuck down there in the comments section and we'll get to them. But timing is really important, and at the end of today's video I'm going to share the 4 resources that I personally use that I think can give you the best overview in regards to current timing plus long-term cycle timing. So depending on who you read and who you listen to, there's 3 options. 1, property is complicated and dangerous and all of that other stuff, and that you can't time it and nobody understands it. The second is, you know, there's this 7 to 10 year property cycle, and then the third is there's this much bigger sort of 14 to 20 year cycle in play. Now, whichever one of those options you subscribe to, all of the things in this video hold true regardless of where you're at, except maybe the first one. For anyone that obviously has bought property at the right time, in the right market, in the right suburb, and bought the right type of property and held it for long enough, understands the value in 1, leverage, and 2, the benefit of the long-term gains associated with this stuff. So I'm going to talk primarily about the 7 to 10 and 18 year cycles today. So that 7 to 10 year cycle, which historically in Australia people thought property prices doubled every 7 to 10 years, that model is dead in my opinion. Obviously we do have 7 to 10 year cycles, but property prices really only get wiped out hard at the top of the 18 sort of to 20 year cycles. So it's important to understand both and understand which one of those 7 to 10 year cycles in the overall 18 year cycle we're actually in at any point in time. Now, to understand that more, I highly recommend you read Phil Henderson's book, The Secret Life of Real Estate and Banking, or Fred Harrison's book, The Power and the Land, which look at boom and bust in the American and UK markets over the last 250 and 350 years. But now I'm going to get into some of the things that I think are important in terms of timing the cycle. So these are the positive things. These are the times that I like to buy. And as Warren Buffett says best, buy when others are scared and be scared when others are greedy. And I really like that concept, and I try to keep that in the back of my mind. The other quote I have in front of me of my office in my desk is, there is nothing new under the sun. Everything that has been will be again. And the reason I have that in front of me is because it's really important to remember that there is a bigger picture cycle going on, or at least has been going on for the last 250 years in America, the last 100 years in Australia, and the sooner that you can recognize the patterns in the cycle, the better off you can actually be medium to longer term. So in terms of the things that I like to buy at, or the times in the cycle, I like to buy at the bottom of the cycle, which is when we've just come out of the GFC or the recession we had to have, or the depression. It's obviously always better to buy at the very bottom when you've got a strong 7 to 14 years of growth ahead of you. That's the same with markets. Now, these things always don't work perfectly. Like, if we look at the last cycle since the GFC, we're obviously 6 to 7 years out of it now in 2018. Sydney and Melbourne prices have absolutely cranked and gone up by 50 to 80%. But prices in Brisbane, for example, have sat flat through that time. So you've got to take all of this cycle stuff with a grain of salt and realize there's global cycles, there's national cycles, and then there's actually state and market related cycles occurring. So if you look at Hare & Todd White's report, the month in review report, that can be a really good way to understand where we're at in Australia and where the key markets like Sydney, Melbourne and Brisbane, etc. are at any point in the cycle. So, overlaying the bigger picture with that more localized stuff is really important if you want to understand this stuff and time the market properly. Now, the other time I like to buy personally is in the mid-cycle slowdown, which is sort of 7 years out of the GFC or the recession, and then that's generally where the share market in America and Australia performs very poorly for a period of time, but then generally doesn't have a huge effect on property prices. Property prices might slide back slightly. They might just sit flat for a couple of years before things really kick off for the second half of the 18 year cycle. But I like to buy then because There's not as many people in the marketplace, and a lot of people are just sort of sitting on the sidelines and waiting to see what happens. I know what happens after that, and that generally looks positive if you look at America, Europe and Australia in the past. Now, the past doesn't always predict the future. You know, obviously you've got to understand that, but it's a nice guide to have, just as a bit of a framework. Some of the things that I don't like, or times I don't like to buy personally, is at the very, very top of the 18-year cycle. They call it the winner's curse. It's the most dangerous time to buy because prices are overheated. Banks are starting to get themselves into trouble like they did in 2007, 8, 9. People start not being able to make repayments because unemployment increases and there's just no money available, so banks are over leveraged. They start defaulting on their loans. The investors paying off their property start defaulting on their loans, and all of a sudden we get ourselves into this slippery slope. And if you look at the history in the last 250 years in America, that winner's curse is generally where the most growth occurs, but then directly after it is the sharp drop of generally between 20 and sometimes up to 50% drops in property prices. Now, don't freak yourself out about this. There's heaps of information online about it. You know, the next major drop, according to Phil Anderson and Fred Harrison, should be coming around about 2026-ish or so. Again, it's about using the time from now till then to get yourself in a stable, strong position to capitalise on the prices when they do go on a bargain. Now, anyone that knows their history in Australia knows that we sort of dodged the GFC. The reason being, the government saw it happening in America and stepped in. Secondly, the Australian banking industry at the time was in a better position, and the government, thanks to Johnny Howard, had actually got us into a surplus before we went into it. You know, they kicked off stimulus, and we also had the mining and resources boom. We're exporting a lot of product to the world, which kind of got us through it, which is a nice thing, but also not a nice thing, because it would have been really nice for property prices to correct at that time by 20, 30, 40%. I mean, in some areas they have, if you look at North Queensland and Perth and stuff, but in other areas, Sydney, Melbourne, etc., they just continued to power through that. They might have sat flat for a period of time, but they didn't go backwards in a heavy, heavy way. So, you know, next time round, growth can't last forever. It might be a bit more severe. But that doesn't matter if you're a long-term investor. If you're holding a property for 20 years, we're talking about 3 to 4 years of hardship. Generally within 5 to 6 or 7 years after the major correction, property prices are more expensive again and the cycle repeats, and that's why it's called a cycle. So don't buy at the top, and understand when that is. Learn to recognize the symptoms in the market that lead to that. It's not linear, otherwise everyone would do it. There's different issues every time around and most people can't see them coming, but just know your history, know your dates based on the past, and if it happens again, great, and you've planned for it. If it doesn't happen again, take advantage of the markets at those times too. I also don't like to buy in the declining stage of a market. Now, if you look at Heron Todd White, Sydney's now in the start of the decline, and it goes from 12 o'clock through to 6 o'clock on the clock. I personally like to buy at the bottom of the market or the start of the recovery or the rising market phases when I know there's upside potential in the market. So a declining market can also be that time, when a GFC first begins to happen. Generally the share market sheds 30 to 70% of its value. Property prices can drop by, like I said, 10, 20, up to 50% based on history. Don't buy that time when everything's going down. Wait for the share market to start to correct, and that's an early indicator that property prices should stabilise within a couple of years after that. So I hope you've got some value in terms of when is the right time to buy an investment property. I know I'm probably looking at this video a bit differently to the way that some people might have come into it. I've just realised I've talked about market as opposed to your personal financial situation, but really enjoyed talking about this today. Went and saw Phil Anderson last night. He was incredible, talking about this stuff for 3 hours, and I've read his book now for the 3rd time. So those resources I was talking about is The Secret Life of Real Estate and Banking by Phil Anderson, The Power in the Land by Fred Harrison. They get you an understanding of the big picture. Then there's the HTW Month in Review report, which gives you a really nice localized view of the Australian property market month by month, as well as CoreLogic's monthly updates which you can just, you know, subscribe to the email and get them emailed straight through to you. It's all good stuff, and the more you learn, obviously the more you can earn and put into practice. So realize there's markets and cycles, and that the more you know about this stuff, the better preparation you can have, the more you can reduce your risk, and the more that you can take advantage of different market conditions at different times. So thank you very much for your time and attention, and have a great day.